Have you seen this funny cartoon? It's like, it's two figures on a school bus, and they're identical, and they're each sitting on opposite rows. There's no one else on the bus. Mm-hmm. And they're both looking out the window. They both have a thought bubble that says, life has no meaning. Mm. But each of their facial expressions, they're interpreting that differently. One of them is ecstatic. He's so happy at life has no meaning, like how amazing. And the other face is just distraught, depressed, just horrified by the idea that there could be no meaning.
Yeah.
So part of this is, well, it's making me think about what you said about the mind sort of being at war with ourselves, with our minds. How much of our thoughts themselves are the problem when we're suffering, versus how much of the way we relate to the thought is the problem. Our perspective, our point of view. How are we looking at that material?
Yes. Like we might be making it worse than it needs to be.
Right. Well, and where does the suffering actually exist? Is it in the thought, or is it in the way we think about the thought? Welcome to the Weekly Transit, a podcast exploring the intersection of Western astrology and Jungian psychology. Astrology is a language that communicates how the planets and stars influence life on Earth, while psychology helps us navigate both conscious and unconscious experiences. Together, these tools offer the potential for self-understanding, growth, and transformation. Join astrologer Scott Tajarian and me, psychotherapist Gabriella Durso, as we dive into the cosmic forecast each week.
Welcome to the Weekly Transit. This is the week of September 2nd to the 8th. Hi, Gabriella.
Hi, Scott.
Before we get started into the week, and this week we're highlighting the new moon in Virgo and Mars's transit into Cancer. You had just a quick announcement before we get started about your workshop, the Dream Workshop.
Yes, I just wanted to remind everyone who expressed interest last week that there should be a newsletter in your inbox with some details about the workshop.
Excellent.
And for those who maybe aren't sure what I'm referring to, last week I announced a workshop that I'm co-facilitating. It's an 8-week online dream work group.
It's going to be amazing.
Thank you. It's called Messages from the Unconscious.
Yes.
And you can find more information about it. It's now been added to my website, gabrieladurso.com. There's a workshops tab.
Okay.
And I'm sure I'll be talking about it more in the coming month, but
amazing.
I'm
and it's
excited.
Happening, starting when, on September 27th, you said?
It starts Friday, September 27th.
And it's going to be weekly for 8 weeks, every Friday.
Yes.
It's interactive, and I love the title.
Thank
Messages
you.
From the Unconscious. Like, yeah, tell me.
Sign me up, right?
Exactly. What is the unconscious trying to tell me?
Yeah.
We got a lot of transits this week talking about the unconscious because Neptune is at play. Saturn is at play this week. Both of them are transiting through Pisces, the mutable water sign symbolized by the fish, which represents the unconscious, the ocean, what is going on in the ocean, the water. We can't really see what's happening in there in the same way that we do in our conscious reality, which is out here on Earth, on the land, in the air. So fascinating. I'm excited for you.
Thank you.
And I'm proud of you for putting that together. So awesome.
Thank you.
It's going to be great. You're welcome. So moving into the week, as we move into this week, the new moon starts on Monday. That's when and we got 3 transits that are happening on Monday. We've got the new moon in Virgo. We've got Mercury in Leo forming a trine with Chiron in Aries, which has been happening really since August 19th. This has been like in a holding pattern. It also goes back to July 18th when these two first connected, and then they kind of separated for a while, but then they came back, and they've been in this holding pattern since August 19th. We've also got Mars, the god of war, the planet of action, aggression, and conflict, transiting through The mutable air sign symbolized by the twins, Gemini, that's the sign of consciousness. So the god of war in the sign of consciousness, squaring off with Neptune, the planet of illusion, in the sign of unconscious, Pisces, which is ruled by Neptune. That's also happening on Monday. So these three transits all converging on Monday, but it happens on the heels of what we talked about last week on Sunday, which was Uranus retrograde in Taurus, which it will be retrograde in Taurus, the mutable earth sign symbolized by the bull, until September 30th of next year. And then Pluto, the Uranus is the planet of revolution, rebellion, innovation, the unexpected. And then Pluto, the planet of transformation, Lord of the underworld, god of death, transited back retrograde into Capricorn, the cardinal earth sign symbolized by the goat. And it's just going to be holding here at 29 degrees from September 1st to November 19th. So that aspect with Pluto is aligning with Uranus in Taurus. That's creating this tone around self-worth, values, radically changing or radically shifting your self-worth and your values so that it's more aligned with the transformation that is occurring towards your goals and ambitions. We're really being encouraged to take responsibility for ourselves, to claim our financial independence and recognize that nobody's going to do it for us, that we need to be the ones who do it for ourselves.
So quite a few transits this week, a lot to digest, to process.
As I like to say, this week, and really the last few weeks, they remind me of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. It's like that's my analogy for when the week is starting with a lot of noise. Like you listen to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and it just comes right in, bum 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 bum, bum 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 bum. And so that's what this week is. This is how it's starting out. And I love the transits in how they are coordinating together, because you've got the three earth signs in play. You've got Uranus in Taurus, you've got the new moon in Virgo, and you've got Pluto in Capricorn. Taurus is about establishing your self-worth, your values. That's the boundary, the floor, the ground. I'm not going into the ground, I'm standing on the ground. That's the boundary. Then there is Capricorn, which is where you want to ascend to, getting to the top of that mountain. Those are your goals and ambitions that are created on the foundation of your self-worth and values. But in between that is where Virgo comes in. In order to go from what you value to what you want to achieve, you need to commit to doing the daily work. All the little things, all the details. And that's what the new moon in Virgo is about. It's about setting your intentions to pay attention to the details. But there's some more going on with the new moon in Virgo that I want to get into, because I want to talk about Zosma, which is the fixed star at 11 degrees in Virgo, which represents suffering, misfortune, victimhood. It's really kind of this, on one side of the coin, it feels like this dark energy. But on the other side of the coin, it's about self-empowerment through the suffering.
And perhaps our relationship with suffering.
Reframing.
How do you want to relate to your suffering?
Exactly. Like Virgo's about service. It's symbolized by the Virgin. And when I think of the Virgin, I think of the great Virgo nun, Mother Teresa, somebody who was born with the sun in Virgo, and she dedicated her life to being of service to others. One thing that I find within myself, and I'll just speak for myself, but when I'm in my own poop and I'm going through that hamster wheel of all the things that I've done wrong and how I'm a horrible person and I hate myself and all of that, what makes me feel better is when I do a reading for somebody or I share the knowledge. I take my gift and I use that to be of service to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So part of this new moon in Virgo is about setting your intentions to release suffering through being of service to others. So if you are suffering, what can you do to help another person?
Well, and it is possible to spend too much time self-reflecting.
Mm-hmm.
There's that expression, navel gazing.
What does that mean? Where you're just staring down at the ground and you're like...
Yeah, you're so focused on your own experience and that position of your head sort of slouching down that you're really not experiencing the world at large at all. You're so focused on your own experience.
Yes.
So that's a beautiful reminder. And oftentimes when we take the time to attune to others in those moments of our own suffering, we find a mirror in some way in that other person.
Right.
That actually relates to our suffering.
Yes. And you realize you're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that you're not here to be punished. Mm-hmm. Right? Like so often it might seem like the world is stacked against me. But when you help other people and you realize, wow, they're going through a lot. Mm-hmm. They actually need more help than I do.
Well, it can put things into perspective. I don't tend to think that there is hierarchy in suffering,
right.
Although I know that
you've suffered more than me.
Well, that's also a very controversial thing to say because there are people on planet Earth that are suffering incredibly right now. So I think there's a choice there of, do you resonate with that statement or not? And that's up to the individual. But maybe in this example, you do get a sense of sort of hierarchy of suffering and you come away with a perspective where you realize it's not that bad what you're going through or that too shall pass.
Yes.
There's a recognition that it won't last forever.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, and when I think about this transit of Mars and Neptune happening the same day as the new moon in Virgo on Monday, September 2nd, it's churning something up beneath the surface. Like Gemini is the sign of thoughts and Mars is action. So I just think of like racing thoughts. What are the racing thoughts that are agitating your mind? And where are they coming up from? Like, I feel like it's important to ask questions about what is the root of my suffering? I feel tortured in my mind. What is the root of that?
Yeah, how much of the suffering is coming from my own thought patterns that I'm responsible for? And then how much suffering is coming from an external source? Like, we live under so much conditioning that I think it can be difficult, but incredibly fruitful for us to stop and look at, where did this belief come from? I think part of what you're talking about are belief systems.
Yes.
Because we all have hundreds of thoughts every day, but the ones that really plague us and cause suffering are often connected to deep-seated belief systems that come from society at large, come from our family systems. It's very rare that it's actually our personal belief. But more common that it's been influenced by external factors, which is understandable, but it's helpful to maybe spend some time reflecting on where that line is. Is my inner critic really my inner critic, or is this a parental voice? Where does this come from?
Yes. Such a great point, because it feels like there is like a war of the consciousness, a war of the mind.
We're at war with ourselves.
We're at war with ourselves. There could be tension around this. I mean, obviously, if it's a war of your mind, that is the tension. So it's important to just key in on where is the suffering coming from? Is it something that is new to me? I feel like it always has to come from outside of you in some way. Like the seed, or maybe it was planted. Maybe you were born with the seed in you. I don't know. But I feel like the seed was planted.
Maybe it's a chicken or egg situation.
Yeah. I mean, regardless, I feel like everybody experiences some form of suffering. And this transit of the new moon conjunct with Zosma, this Zosma, this fixed star, which represents suffering and misfortune, is meant to create that sense of consciousness within us so that we can be aware of it, so that we can eliminate it.
Mm-hmm.
So that we can feel that greater flow of life. And it's just interesting that it's happening with Mars in Gemini squaring Neptune in Pisces for the final time. This is the 10th and final time that Mars in Gemini will be squaring Neptune in Pisces in our lifetime. It doesn't happen again until like 2175.
Wow.
Yeah, just before my 200th birthday. Yeah, so I'll be celebrating.
So it's the end of a cycle.
It's the end of a cycle. And it's happening with Mercury in Leo, forming a trine, a supportive aspect with Chiron in Aries, which is challenging the ego to open your heart, to be bold and courageous in listening to others, in speaking from your heart, listening from your heart, facing your fears and insecurities. In order to acknowledge suffering within yourself, you have to have an open heart. Right? Doesn't that seem that's how it feels to me?
That resonates for me too.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I wonder if part of this awareness of being with our suffering might be inviting us to think about is, what do we believe about meaning making? Do we believe that there is meaning in our suffering? I think this is a place that ultimately, if you're someone who's been in therapy longer term, and I'm sure even outside of that kind of a relationship, many people arrive to this question of, not only does my life have meaning, but is there any meaning to my suffering? And there sort of can be pretty different schools of thought.
Which are?
Well, one extreme would be that there is no meaning to this experience, the human experience, to suffering, that we're just having an experience, and that in and of itself is just what we're doing, and it's complete just because it's an experience. And then maybe an opposite extreme would be that no, everything has meaning, and that we need to extract. I think that tends to be me as well, but I do sort of see both sides of it. But that perspective is saying, well, we actually need to kind of distill the meaning out of our suffering just to be able to tolerate it, just to be able to feel that it has a purpose so that we can carry on.
Well, I think the simplest way to recognize the meaning of suffering is to see that acknowledging that you have suffering gives you something to relate to others on. Like, the meaning of suffering is that we are all suffering. And so the meaning to your suffering is so that you can relate to others, because everyone experiences some form of suffering throughout their life.
Have you seen this funny cartoon? It's like It's two figures on a school bus, and they're identical, and they're each sitting on opposite rows. There's no one else on the bus.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both looking out the window. They both have a thought bubble that says life has no meaning.
Mm.
But each of their facial expressions, they're interpreting that differently. One of them is ecstatic. He's so happy at life has no meaning, like how amazing. And the other face is just distraught, depressed, just horrified by the idea that there could be no meaning.
Yeah.
So part of this is, well, it's making me think about what you said about the mind sort of being at war with ourselves, with our minds. How much of our thoughts themselves are the problem when we're suffering, versus how much of the way we relate to the thought is the problem. Our perspective, our point of view. How are we looking at that material?
Yes. Like we might be making it worse than it needs to be.
Right. Well, and where does the suffering actually exist? Is it in the thought, or is it in the way we think about the thought?
Right.
Or have a relationship with the thought?
Hmm.
So there's kind of different layers here.
Yes. Well, and I also think about it in terms of like the next transit as we move further into the week is Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, the planet of relationships, is transiting through Libra, the sign that it rules, the sign that's symbolized by the scales. It represents how I relate to others. Venus is opposing the North Node in Aries, which is the sign that represents my relationship to myself. So I'm thinking about, a little earlier, you were saying like, where does this come from? This is a transit that is urging us to look at the people around us. And do they authentically reflect how I see myself? And if not, then that might be where some of the suffering is, because maybe you might be frustrated that you're not presenting yourself or expressing yourself in the way that feels authentic to you. Or maybe you just don't know yourself in the way that you thought that you did. Because the people around you are reflecting you.
Well, part of what I hear in that is part of what really makes us feel like we're in a state of suffering is when we feel alone. And when we can't see that reflection of self in other, which is essentially what you're talking about, then we can't see that everyone is suffering. We think that our suffering is greater. And maybe that's where you mentioned the ego a few minutes ago.
Yes.
That's where that comes in. You think that your suffering is greater and that you are alone.
Yep.
And you can't see it mirrored because you think somehow that yours is different or is greater or is better or is somehow separate from.
And that's coming from a closed heart, where you don't have the ability to open your heart and recognize that other people are suffering. An open heart is going to, like, if you are in that place, like you're saying, where there's someone suffering because they're not able to see that other people are suffering, that to me is talking, when you were talking about the ego, that's talking about this Mercury and Leo transit trine Chiron and Aries, where maybe you're afraid to look and see that other people are suffering because your ego is so focused on yourself that you can't think of other people's suffering. If your heart is open, you are open to receiving and hearing the pain and suffering of others. That is actually going to help alleviate your own. Because you realize that the whole world isn't stacked against just you. Everybody has challenges in their life. It doesn't matter what your background is, where you come from, how much money you make. I see people all different shapes and sizes, and everybody struggles.
Mm-hmm.
So that takes us back to being of service to others, eliminating these thought patterns that are so focused on what's wrong with you or how you have been wronged, and instead reframing your mind to say, to being more, a greater sense of humility to your life. That this is not all about me.
Mm-hmm.
This is not all about me. This world is not just here for me. I'm a person living in this world. There's a lot of other people here too that are also struggling, suffering. So I'm going to be setting your intentions to be more humble. Now, you also mentioned, where does it come from? Where does this suffering come from? And that takes us to Mars in Cancer, because we're going to have a long period here of Mars in Cancer, the god of war in the sign that represents the past. Like when you think of Cancer, it's cardinal water, it's symbolized by the crab, but it's ruled by the moon. And the moon is reflecting the light of the sun. Therefore, the light that is emanating off of the moon is past light. Therefore, Cancer represents your past. The god of war is transiting through that sign from September 4th to November 3rd. And then it moves into Leo for a couple months, and then it transits back into Cancer.
So is part of this around maybe suffering in our families, our familial line, or is that part of what could come up?
Absolutely. I mean, like, I was talking to someone the other day who going through a challenging period, and I was like, well, this person that you're having a challenge with, their upbringing was perfect, right? Their parents were just like the happiest couple that ever lived. And they're like, no. Yeah, exactly. So why do you think this person that is giving you so much trouble is suffering and going through their challenges as well? You see it go from generation to generation. Suffering gets passed down through the DNA.
Well, and I would say if you have a hard time seeing yourself mirrored in anyone, it's probably your family members. If you have difficult relationships with them.
Absolutely. Yes.
That's one of the hardest places to receive that mirror.
Family is the most difficult reflection. And
it's the places where we have most of the mirrors, as we know from an astrological perspective.
Because usually the primal triad is reflected in family members.
Yes.
So with Mars transiting through Cancer, that's the god of war in the sign that represents your family, your past, your roots, your upbringing, your ancestry. We're going to be challenged. We're going to be challenged to face our past. And through that, there may be conflicts that arise in the home. You might find that the same fight that you're having with your spouse or your family member is the same fight that your parents had.
You've carried it forward.
Exactly.
Well, you've carried it forward because when you experienced it as a child, you probably experienced it somewhat unconsciously, or it got repressed.
Yep.
It got stored somewhere kind of outside of your consciousness because as a child, you probably just didn't understand what was going on.
Yes.
And so the reason that we repeat cycles is because we want to become conscious of them. It's not because we want to suffer or because we deserve to suffer, but because
we want a resolution.
We actually want to experience the wound and then experience the healing.
Yes.
And so the only way to do that is to bring it through our own systems, our own relationships, and to replay it.
Yep. Exactly. And so there may be unresolved conflicts that existed in your past that are being brought to the present.
Right. It might be the same conflict coming back with family members, or it could be that conflict sort of disguised in a new dynamic, a new relationship.
Like with us, like with me, you're working out conflicts with your brother. I'm working out conflicts with my dad. And you're my dad and I'm your brother.
Sometimes, not all the time.
No, I know. But like when the conflicts come up, that is what comes up for me. And so really think about the people that you're in relationship, like even if it was before you, like, and before any of my previous girlfriends, like I could see it in my roommates. I was playing out the same dynamics with my dad over and over again with roommates, guys. And then it became girlfriends. They're all my dad.
Yep.
So who is that person that maybe created or planted the seed of conflict within you? And what the work is to go back into the past. And
because it's really about that original relationship, right? I mean, we always want the newer person, like the person who's holding that, maybe that projection for us to fix it, like to take responsibility for that original wound. But that's actually, it's not literally possible, right? But it is possible in the sense that we are looking for healing and looking for a way to heal that dynamic.
Yes.
So it's possible in that new relationship, but we have to be careful holding people responsible, trying to get them to heal things from a wound that happened before we met them.
Right.
It's sort of a gray area.
It's not their responsibility.
Right.
Yes.
But it's also in what's being co-created in these new relationships, each person, each piece of the puzzle is getting something from that struggle. It somehow fits with their own suffering and their own wound, and that's why they're in it.
Yes.
So it is this like really fascinating, this unconscious, it is the unconscious that pulls us together.
Yes.
And, when people describe, oh, I met them and they just felt familiar, sometimes that's not great. I mean, if you feel the pull, then there's something there for you to look at. But sometimes that pull is because sometimes that pull is indicating that there's another relationship involved from the past.
Yep. Yeah. Typically, that's why you get involved with anyone in your life, because they're reflecting somebody from your past that you need to work something out with. And they're seeing somebody from their past in you that they need to work something out with. And that's the unconscious attraction between two people, whether it's a lover, a friend, or a business partner.
Right. And we have to do this because when we first experienced that dynamic, we were children. So we didn't even have fully formed brains. How could we understand what was actually happening?
And that's what's funny for me is when I look at people's charts astrologically and I like, wow, this person in my present life reflects this family member from my past. So I was unconsciously programmed to feel attracted to my mother, my father, my sister because they were in my life, or my cousins. And so now I'm recreating those families in my present life. Those same family astrological dynamics.
Right.
So we're going to have a long time to work with this Mars transit energy. I'm going to put all the dates. They're in the show notes. So if you're curious about the dates, just go ahead and read the show notes because there's a lot of dates in here and I just don't want to ramble them all off because it can be kind of a lot. But it's in the show notes. I have the dates, the last 3 times that Mars was transiting through Cancer. And also the next time that Mars is going to be transiting through Cancer after this time, because it's coming back next year, retrograde. So we have like this extended period of facing our familial conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
And
so I imagine if you're someone who's interested in those specific dates, it's helpful to have them written down anyway.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think one of the key takeaways also is, and if you're getting deep into understanding your astrological code, and of course, if you want to learn more about how this transit is affecting you or any of the other transits are affecting you directly, I encourage you to contact me for a reading at theweeklytransit.com. But just a highlight here is, if you're somebody who is learning about the language of astrology and wants to kind of do it yourself, with this Mars transit, look at your astrological code and are there any planets in Aries or Libra? Because whenever Mars in Cancer aligns with those planets in Aries and Libra, that is going to be a period where these challenges or conflicts are going to be re-stimulated within your reality. And whatever conflicts or challenges that are coming up around those dates where Mars is scoring those points in Aries or Libra, that's going to be a window of opportunity for you to reflect upon your past so that you can see, like, when was the last time I had a conflict like this? Okay. And when was the first time I had a conflict like this? Oh, wow. Yeah. Then I was 4 years old. I remember my dad did this, that, the next thing. Okay, I need to go back in time and I need to be there with my younger self and nurture myself. Because that's what Cancer is about. It's about nurturing. It's about being kind. It's about being caring. And with Mars transiting through this sign, it's about having the courage to be kind, caring, and nurturing to yourself and to those that you share emotions with.
Well, and it's also about reparenting. Cancer is the mother. And so when we know how old we were when we had that original wounding, often we know kind of where our inner child is stuck, what age, what developmental cycle are they still in?
Yes.
And we can go through a healing process of reparenting ourselves, which is incredibly empowering and can also bring up a lot of grief around the reality that we didn't get all of our needs met from our parents.
My God.
Because they didn't get all of their needs met from their parents either, and so on and so forth. But it's really useful to try and find, like you said, when is the first time this ever happened?
I had some insight about that just a few weeks ago when I was with my uncle, who's 83 years old. And there is a moment where he seemed like a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
And that's when he lost his mom.
Of
and
course.
I'm like, this is an 83-year-old man, but he is behaving like a little boy. And no wonder, because that's when he lost his mom. That was the trauma that kind of set that.
It stops
clay.
the clock.
Yes, exactly. Like the clay became solidified. And he has had trouble growing past that point. And we all have that. So it's not just to point out
Absolutely.
him. Like, you know?
Yeah.
So I just think about myself. When was my trauma that happened when I was young, and where am I stunted? And I can definitely see that as well. I think it was around 13, 14. And I can get back into that point really easily.
I would say mine is in my teen years as well. But it's interesting that some traumas, like when you look at maybe a primal trauma that you had in your life, oftentimes that can be in the pre-verbal stage. If you have an attachment trauma, for example, where maybe you were neglected as a baby, then your trauma is pre-verbal and it has to be processed differently because it's in your unconscious.
Right.
It's in your implicit memory, not your explicit memory.
Well, and the funny thing is when I guess it's not funny, but like when you look at somebody's astrological code, you can see where the trauma is and how that was actually framed or preconditioned before as you were born.
How it was laid out for you
exactly.
in the blueprint.
Yes.
Yeah.
So closing out the week, we've got 2 more transits. That's Mercury continuing through Leo, forms a square aspect to Uranus and Taurus, along with the Sun in Virgo opposing Saturn in Pisces. This is happening at the end of the week. The Mercury transit is exact on Friday, and the Sun transit is exact on Saturday. It's the Sun is opposite Saturn on Saturn day. So, but these two also kind of go hand in hand, where this is how we're closing the week, where Mercury is squaring off with Uranus in Taurus. This is the third and final time that this transit has occurred over the last month and a half, basically, because the first time happened on July 21st, the second time August 18th, and now again on September 6th because of Mercury's retrograde. But it's the challenge between the heart, the expression of your heart, and your values, and creating that sense of independence in terms of what you value or your self-worth in a way that satisfies your heart. And there might be conflict there because your heart is saying, well, I really want this, but your reality is saying you can't have that.
So there's the suffering again.
Exactly. And then more suffering with the Sun in Virgo opposing Saturn in Pisces. Virgo is the other sign that represents conscious reality because it's also ruled by Mercury. In a sense, it's almost even more conscious than Gemini because it's Earth and it's like what you can consciously see.
Material.
And so there's this opposition between the planet of light, life, and vitality and the planet of restriction. The planet of restriction in the sign of the unconscious. So it's your will, the energy force, the sense, your sense of vitality in your daily reality is feeling restricted by your unconscious. So it's like, I really want this, but I'm not getting it. What's wrong with me? And what's going on in your mind? What is going on in your dreams? And not just in your sleeping dreams, which you'll be talking about in your workshop, but also in your
daydreams, your fantasies,
the mundane functions of just rolling through life, driving your car to and from work. You're not paying attention to where you're going. Your mind is drifting off other places.
Well, this Virgo energy is, I was going to say inviting us, but I think maybe forcing us to slow down is a better word, because we know Virgo rules the intestines. And so it's literally a process of digesting.
A process of elimination.
Of digesting, right, which...
Because that's what happens in
elimination,
digestion.
Right, is a part of that.
You eat it and then you poop it out.
What are the... what are the elements, like the minerals? What is nutrients from what I have taken into my body, and what is waste? And that is a slow process that takes time. It involves being in the details, which is a quality of Virgo.
Yes.
But it is a slow process.
I think of like making like pottery. And you have your wet piece of clay and it's on the wheel that's spinning around, and you're constantly shaping it. But as you're shaping it, you're moving parts of the clay that are no longer fitting into the structure. They're falling away. So what is it? What is feeling restricted in your heart that needs to be eliminated? What is the suffering within your mind that needs to be eliminated? Are there dreams that you're having where you're like, I had this nightmare? What does that mean? Well, I need to take the class with Gabriella and she'll tell me what it means. And how do I reframe and restructure that and eliminate those old thoughts that are creating suffering not only in my mind, but in my physical reality and in my heart, my sense of joy and fun.
Beautifully said.
So that's the week. I mean, it's a power-packed week. There's a lot of juice in this week for reframing, restructuring, reorganizing, eliminating. But it all roots back to what brings you joy and how can you cultivate that joy into a sense of service to others. That's the transit from Leo to Virgo. What do you enjoy and how can you cultivate that joy into service for others?
And hopefully others are paying it forward and you could be on the receiving end.
Yes.
As well.
Yes. Let's hope. One can hope.
Let us know how you're doing out there. If you want to drop us a line, drop us a comment.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Come for a session. Let us know.
Absolutely. Yes.
We appreciate you all being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Gabriella, for everything you shared.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the weekly transit. If you're curious to learn how these transits or any other transits may be affecting you, or if you're interested in learning more about your astrological code, contact me for a reading at theweeklytransit.com. If you're interested in delving into the world of psychotherapy with Gabriella, you can schedule a consultation with her at gabrielladurso.com. That's Gabrielladurso.com. Support for the podcast can be done through a monthly contribution on Spotify, rating us 5 stars, subscribing to our channel on YouTube, or writing a favorable review on Apple Podcasts. We are grateful for your support. This episode was produced by me, Scott Tajarian. Music written by Ben Leinbach from Listen Deep by Amber Herzog-Lyman. Wishing you all the best as you ride the planetary waves.